If you've been looking for a full-frame Sony Cinema camera, but it's hard to stomach the price of an FX3, the FX2 may be the perfect camera for you. That is, if you can look past one of its biggest compromises, a 1.5x crop in 4K 60. In this video, I'm going to be reviewing the FX2 from the perspective of a freelance filmmaker that uses their camera to film weddings, commercials, documentaries, etc. to make money, and telling you if it is the camera that you should buy. Also, for the sake of ethics, I want you to know this video is not paid or sponsored by Sony, but they have loaned me this camera so I can make this review, and I'll be returning it to them very soon. Plus, because I would like to help you out even more, I'm also going to link in the video description to my filmmaker gear guide, which is going to show you all the equipment that I recommend you purchase for filmmaking, along with links to all the gear that I recommend. You can download this guide completely for free at the link in the video description. Anyways then, talking about the Sony FX2, the first thing you need to know is that this camera shares a lot of its DNA with a certain photography-focused camera that Sony makes that also happens to be incredibly popular. Yes, just like how the FX3 shares its sensor with the A7S III and the FX30 shares its sensor with the A6700, this new FX2 shares its sensor with the very popular A7 IV. Both the FX2 and A7 IV have a 33 megapixel sensor with many of the same capabilities. But when it comes to the body and overall features, this camera is offering a lot that filmmakers have been requesting, while also coming in at a cheaper price than the FX3. So let's talk about these new features and why the heck you should care about them if you wanted to use this camera for filming videos for your clients. Up first, you have the body, and this is going to feel similar in some ways, but also improved and refined over the FX3 and FX30. This body really feels like a strong evolution of those cameras, enough so that if Sony were to release an FX3 Mark II in the future, for example, which I know a lot of filmmakers are asking for and I don't know anything about, but I am betting that Sony will use this body, albeit with even more improvements, of course. For now, let's stick with talking about the FX2. You still get the gray cinema camera look that, in my opinion, is so iconic with the FX3 and FX30. You have mounting points and tons of customizable buttons, one more than the FX3 and FX30, by the way. And if you look over here on the side, Sony has eliminated some of the flip-out panels from their earlier cinema cameras. You have this microphone jack and headphone jack that are now fully exposed on the side near the bottom. The mic jack won't be hit by the screen, which is a nice touch. This works really well. Next, look at the top of the camera and hold up a second, because here's where you're going to find arguably one of the biggest differences between this camera and the FX3 or FX30, and that is this camera comes with an electronic viewfinder. Yes, I think it's hilarious that Sony was like, hey, we're making a cinema camera, we're getting rid of the EVF to make it more video focused. But here we are a few years later, and they're like, hey, JK about that, don't worry, the EVF is actually back, okay? We know you guys loved it. Well, hold up too, because this EVF has a really big trick up its sleeve, and that is this EVF steals one of the features that you would commonly find on a detachable EVF on a cinema camera. Namely, this EVF can tilt up to 90 degrees vertically or anywhere in between, because while photographers typically hold their camera up to their face and take a photo with it, filmmakers oftentimes have the camera mounted lower, either at chest height with a rig or handheld looking down at it. And because of this difference, Sony realized they need to make an EVF that would accommodate this style of filmmaking. And I have to say, as someone that still uses the Sony A7S III extensively, having an EVF has always been a strength of that camera, especially whenever I'm filming for a client or wedding outdoors in the very bright Texas sunlight, where even with the screen brightness on the back turned up to maximum, sometimes I really want to be able to confirm what I'm seeing on the camera. And so because that camera has an EVF, I can look through it and make sure that I'm filming properly. Now that I've used this one, I don't want to go back to a camera that does not have an articulating EVF like this. It works so well. It feels so much more natural for filmmaking. I love the articulation. Speaking of articulation though, and looking at the main screen on the back of this camera now, I do wish that Sony was able to include the same screen from the A7R5 on it, where it not only flips out but also up and down as well. Cameras from Sony's competition like the Panasonic S1 II are including flippy screens like that, and I really wish that Sony would have added that to this camera as well. Please, Sony, give all of your future cinema cameras after this one a flippy, tilty screen. We as filmmakers would really appreciate it. Next, as far as changes to the body of this camera go in comparison to the FX3 and FX30, another literally larger and more welcome change is the addition of a larger hand grip, making the camera even more comfortable to hold while filming. Trust me, this thing feels so great to hold. I personally am someone that's either hand holding my cameras or using them on a gimbal all day, so having an improved hand grip is really appreciated. If you're someone like me who films for 8, 10, 12 hours at a time, you're really going to appreciate this too. Now, speaking of larger features of the FX3, another thing that's been enlarged is the cooling fan vent on this camera, as well as improving the heat dissipation structure inside it. The fan intake is now visible whenever you pull the screen out from the back of the camera, and it's looking to me like this thing is going to be capable of intaking and exhausting a lot more heat, which is appreciated. To be clear, I was never really concerned about the FX3 or FX30 overheating due to them having a great fan inside them, but as someone who lives in Texas, I will always take even more overheating protection like a larger fan intake. And in addition, I'm always trying to think about the future of Sony's cameras, because what you have to remember is that anytime they make an improvement to one camera, that feature usually trickles down to their other bodies as well. So even if you were someone saying, why would Sony waste their time with a larger fan or better heat dissipation tech? You need to remember that I would bet in a couple years we will see new cameras with new sensors that potentially require even greater overheating protection because they film larger resolutions and frame rates. Heck, I'm just throwing this out there, okay? I don't know anything, but what if Sony were to release a cinema camera version of the A1 Mark II? That camera would record 8K and would definitely need more robust overheating protection. I'm not saying that's going to happen, to be clear, okay? But what I am saying is that with the addition of a new cinema camera using the same sensor as the A7 IV now, randomly, a couple years after the FX3 and FX30, it's not at all outside the realm of possibility that Sony could have an 8K cinema camera in development. You can comment below if you want to see something like that. I want to know. Side note, by the way, as far as an overheating test goes, I'm going to hold off on doing that with this camera because it's only running beta firmware 0.71 right now, and so if it were to overheat, which I doubt it would considering how big this fan is, but if it were, I would find myself wondering whether it was the firmware that hadn't been optimized. So instead, I'm going to wait until this camera is officially released, and then we can do an overheating test then. To be clear though, whenever I had this camera outdoors in 100+ degree weather filming test footage, it never exhibited any signs of overheating, and it handled it like a champ. Anyways, talking more about the FX2, and remembering this camera pulls much of its underlying technology from the A7 IV, whenever you open up the memory card slot, you may recall that while the camera had dual memory card slots, only one of them was a combo CF Express and SD card slot, while the second card slot was SD, and guess what? This FX2 does the same thing. So you were only going to be able to use one CF Express Type A card with this camera, but to be honest, this is not a big deal or really a con in my opinion. What you need to remember is that when it comes to video, aside from the argument of faster transfer speeds whenever you're copying files from your camera to your computer, otherwise, there's really not a huge benefit of using CF Express Type A cards with this camera. You can still record in 4K at up to 60 frames per second to SD cards in H.264 and H.265, and it's only when you want to record in the much higher bitrate XAVCS-I format that you will need a CF Express A card, and I really don't recommend that format. It's overkill for 99% of situations. Instead, I would just stick with affordable SD cards, and good news, you can dual record them just fine with no issues, or you can even mix and match SD cards and CF Express cards and still do record. It works fine in all my testing. Moving on then, let's talk about something that I do not actually like when it comes to changes to this camera, and which I really think is actually a step backward as far as the cinema line goes, and that is the elimination of the mode button on the camera. On Sony's photography focused cameras, there's a very nice mode dial on the top that you can use to quickly change settings between different presets, and the way that I have my camera set up is that one preset is set to film in 4K at 24 frames per second, another is 4K at 60 frames per second, etc., etc. And on Sony's cinema camera lineup, like the FX3 and FX30, there's always been a mode button that you can press to immediately change between these different presets, kind of like a virtual mode dial. But now, with the FX2, even though Sony added an extra custom button, that came with the elimination of the mode button that was present on the FX3 and FX30. It just isn't there anymore, and it's so weird. Instead, Sony made the function menu button double as the mode button, but you have to hold it down for about 1 second to bring up the mode menu with all your presets to change your settings, and this is a big interrupter to my filming workflow because I prefer to film as quickly as possible, and this is really annoying, and I don't know why Sony did it. To work around it, you can thankfully go into the menu and change a different custom button to become the mode button again, but that means that the extra custom button that Sony gave you as a custom button is now back to being a mode dial button. Even then, whenever you press this mode dial button, you then have to also press the right button to access your presets. It's just a pain, okay? I don't love it. It takes more steps, it's harder to film quickly, and I'm bothered, if you can't tell. Lastly, as far as the overall body of the camera is concerned, the only other feature that I want to draw your attention to that is similar between this camera and the FX3 and FX30 is that just like those cameras, Sony's also going to be selling two separate versions, one with an XLR handle and one without. So you have the option of saving some money if you don't commonly use XLR audio. You'll save a few $100. Now, are you ready to talk image quality? Let's talk image quality. I have very good news for you because this sensor is shared with the A7 IV. I absolutely loved the video quality that I could get from this camera, and everything from the dynamic range to the 422 10-bit colors, S-Log3, etc. across the board was truly excellent on the A7 IV, and all that translates over to this cinema camera as well. Plus, the FX2 comes with the inclusion of Cine EI mode and LUT support, which is fantastic. In short, if you are buying an FX2 as your first cinema camera, you're going to absolutely love the footage that you get from it. And if you're someone using an FX3 or FX30 already, and you're wanting to add a second camera to your collection, this camera's footage will match extremely well with other Sony cameras, making it extremely easy to integrate into your current workflow. In fact, you may end up liking the FX2 even more, especially if you film in 4K at 24 or 30 frames per second, because the footage you film at those resolutions and frame rates is oversampled from 7K, making it even sharper, which is great to see. Unfortunately though, there is no sign of open gate recording, but there is anamorphic D-squeeze, which I guess is better than nothing, but we're gonna have to wait for the next generation of Sony cameras with all new sensors before we hopefully see them start to compete with Panasonic and offer open gate recording. Please, Sony, come on. Next, Sony has made some great improvements to low light and image stabilization with the FX2 because they've taken the AI autofocus chip that they first introduced with the A7R5 and stuffed it into this camera as well, meaning that it has dramatically improved autofocus performance, even if the people you're filming are in weird poses. It also includes the dynamic active image stabilization feature first introduced in Sony's vlogging cameras, enabling you to get amazing handheld footage without even needing a gimbal. So when it comes to autofocus and stabilization, this camera is going to outperform the FX3 and FX30 because these are hardware-specific features that Sony has added. They can go back and retroactively add these to their earlier cameras with a firmware update. I will say though, when it comes to rolling shutter, the A7 IV sensor was not known for having the best performance in that area, and I'm going to say that the FX2 doesn't necessarily either. Because while I'm not someone that commonly shakes my camera back and forth when filming, if you film a lot handheld, especially if you use this dynamic active stabilization mode and you are running, you are going to notice some rolling shutter due to the lower refresh rate of the sensor. This is not a deal breaker to me, but it is something that you need to be aware of if you film differently than I do. Now, when it comes to ISO and low light performance in particular, this is where you're going to see a rather interesting improvement over the A7 IV as well, because while both the A7 IV and FX2 have the same sensor, which is known as a dual ISO sensor, meaning there are two ISO levels where the footage looks its best and cleanest, with the A7 IV, the dual ISOs were 800 and 3200. With the FX2, this has been improved, with the base ISO still being 800, but the second ISO being increased up to 4000. To me, it looks like Sony's engineers have worked as hard as they can to squeeze every single bit of performance out of this sensor, and they were able to give the ISO a nice little boost. And to be clear, because I know there are going to be people commenting saying, Matt, the dual ISO levels are not as good as the FX3. That camera can hit ISO 12800 and still look clean. You are correct. The FX3 is still the undisputed low light king, but harkening back to my A7 IV review, I filmed a wedding with that camera at an extremely dark reception where I was cranking the ISO up to 16,000 or higher, and the camera handled it like an absolute champ with minimal noise that was still completely usable. So if you are someone who commonly finds yourself in situations filming in low light like a wedding, you don't have to buy an FX3 to get great low light performance. This FX2 sensor is still incredibly good in low light as well, and I think you're going to be really happy with it. Now that said, where I think you're not going to be as happy is going to come in the area of frame rates, because while this camera is capable of filming in 4K at up to 60 frames per second, if you want to film at 120 FPS, you're going to have to drop the resolution down to 1080p HD. But arguably worse, and something that I hope would have changed with the addition of some sensor tweaking and a big fan, but that sadly did not, is that the FX2, just like the A7 IV, has a 1.5x crop whenever you film in 4K at 60 frames per second. I wish it wasn't so. I wish Sony could have made a full frame 4K 60 FPS work with this camera, but from a marketing perspective, I also totally understand it. If you want a cheaper APS-C size sensor with great cooling and video features, get an FX30. If you want to bump up to full frame with better low light, get the FX2. It does have a compromise or two. And then if you want to upgrade to an absolute powerhouse of a camera with no compromises because you have more of a budget and you can film in 4K 60 or 4K 120, get the FX3. And here's the deal. Just like how I thought the A7 IV was a fantastic choice for a lot of filmmakers, I think this FX2 is going to be a great choice as well, even if it does require more steps and work to change the shooting modes. And it has that crop. If you can look past that, this camera solves one of the biggest issues that I had with the A7 IV, namely a potential for overheating due to that camera sensor not having a fan and oversampling that 7K image down to 4K in the camera. Well, it has a fan now, and that's fixed. Throw in the new tilting EVF, better autofocus enhanced with AI, and this really may be the Goldilocks Sony camera for a lot of filmmakers. The FX30 sensor may be too small, the FX3 may give you too much and really cost too much, but the FX2 is just right. This camera is heavily refined, and aside from that mode button issue, I like the evolution and refinement Sony have added to this camera, and I think that regardless of how you feel about it, we're seeing a preview here of what a potential FX3 Mark II will look like, because I'm betting that it's going to have an EVF like this, and a large grip, and other random stuff that Sony wants to throw in. To be clear, I'm not sure exactly what Sony's going to be charging for this FX2 camera though. They told me the rather wide range of $2,000 to $3,000, so this could either be a really great deal or just an okay deal. Just keep in mind, if you want to know the official price for this camera, please check the video description. I'll have a link where you can pre-order it with all of the official pricing information. You can let me know in the comments whether you agree with me or not about where the FX2 falls in the lineup between the FX3 and FX30, because let's be honest, there are a ton of cameras right now coming out from different camera manufacturers, and pretty much all of them across the board are incredibly good. So this is really a great time to be a filmmaker. Speaking of being a filmmaker, if you would like help becoming a wedding filmmaker, I want you to know that I have a free workshop that I put together that's going to show you how to book a wedding in 30 days or less. So regardless of whether you have never filmed a wedding before and you're looking to book your first, or you've been filming weddings for a while and you're wanting to book even more of them, this workshop is going to be incredibly helpful to you. And like I said, it's completely free and you can watch it in the video description. Thanks so much for watching and have a great day.